They say you never forget the moment someone questions your very right to exist in a space you've helped build. For Ebony Carter, that moment happened at 35,000 feet in a first-class cabin she'd personally made possible. When the pilot peered down the aisle, locked eyes with her and demanded, "Do you belong here?" He had no idea he was speaking to the airline's majority owner. No idea that his words would spark a chain of events full of corporate power plays, secret alliances, and a swift seismic dose of karma. Buckle up for a tale of triumph, betrayal, and ultimate vindication. Ebony Carter woke up before dawn in her penthouse, overlooking the sparkling Atlanta skyline. The chatter of early morning traffic drifted through her open window, mingling with the faint hum of the city's heartbeat. As CEO and majority shareholder, 51% ownership of the rising airline company, Aero Meridian, Ebony, was used to early meetings and even earlier flights. But this particular day, she felt an undercurrent of excitement in her veins. She was scheduled to fly from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to Los Angeles for a board meeting that could redefine her company's place among the giants of the aviation industry. She smoothed her tailored navy suit, a subtle nod to the history of pilots' uniforms, and gazed at her reflection. Everything about her exuded calm confidence, from her poised posture to the gold cufflinks that once belonged to her late father. He had been a dreamer, a man who believed in her abilities long before she believed in her own. It was his unwavering faith that had propelled her to become one of the most successful black female entrepreneurs in the country. As her private car whisked her away to the airport, Ebony reviewed the details of her itinerary. She was flying on one of Aero Meridian's newest Boeing 737 MAX jets, equipped with top-tier amenities, plush seating, and high-efficiency engines that saved both cost and environmental impact. Today, she wasn't just another passenger. She was the woman who had envisioned the airline's meteoric rise from a scrappy regional carrier to a serious competitor to the likes of Delta and American. Her ownership stake, negotiated after years of strategic maneuvering, had made her a formidable force in the industry. Arriving at Hartsfield-Jackson, Ebony bypassed the usual hustle and bustle by slipping into a private security lane, greeted by staff members who recognized her on sight. She offered a polite smile and greeted them by name, remembering details about their families or favorite sports teams. It was part of her leadership philosophy. Know your people, and they will champion your vision. She made her way to Gate B12, where the Aero Meridian Boeing 737 MAX was already in final boarding. A few travelers glanced her way, curious about the woman striding to the front of the line. But Ebony was used to the looks, those silent, sometimes envious gazes that lingered on her tailored suit, natural hair, or the way she carried herself like someone who knew her own worth. A flight attendant checked her ticket. "Welcome, Miss Carter," the attendant said, a slightly nervous tremor in her voice. The flight attendant was new, Ebony could tell. She simply offered a warm smile and nodded. "Thank you for your help," Ebony replied softly. As she settled into her seat in first class, seat 1A, Ebony looked around. The cabin was pristine, with plush leather seats and overhead bins embroidered with the company's sleek silver logo. She felt a rare moment of pride in her accomplishment. This was the airline she had nurtured from the ground up. This was a dream taking flight. Yet in the midst of her gratitude, an odd tension tugged at her. A sense that something in this otherwise normal day wasn't quite right. She brushed it off, attributing it to the weight of the upcoming meetings. Little did she know her next encounter would turn the routine flight into a storm of conflict-awakening latent prejudices within the very structure she had helped build. She pulled out her laptop, determined to get a head start on her final notes for the LA meeting. Unbeknownst to her, just behind the cockpit door, a pilot who prided himself on keeping order was about to challenge everything Ebony represented. The stage was set for a confrontation that would send shockwaves through the airline, the industry, and social media across the globe. Captain Martin Bradley was a seasoned pilot who had spent over 2 decades in the cockpit. The weight of thousands of flights sat on his shoulders, a testament to his skill, punctuality, and devotion to safety. He had an impeccable record. No incidents, no accidents, only glowing reviews from passengers who appreciated his smooth landings and timely arrivals. But Martin was also a man of tradition, someone who believed in the old hierarchy. The captain commands ultimate respect, crew members adhere to strict protocol, and first class is for the privileged few who look the part. He noticed Ebony the moment he emerged from the cockpit to greet the passengers. She was young, probably in her early 30s, and exuded a confidence he couldn't quite place. Something about her presence grated against the stereotypes he'd unconsciously nurtured all his life. Brushing aside any hesitations, Martin plastered on a polite smile as he moved down the aisle, acknowledging passengers with a nod. When he reached Ebony's seat, he cleared his throat. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, using his official greeting voice. Ebony was typing, her eyes narrowed in focus. She looked up, and a polite smile graced her lips. "Good morning, Captain," she replied, meeting his gaze. An unexpected flicker of doubt danced across Martin's mind. He couldn't shake a nagging question. How did this woman afford first class? The question itself was already loaded with bias, but Martin didn't recognize it as such. He prided himself on being a fair man, a colorblind man. Still, something in him insisted he needed to confirm she belonged. Something about Ebony demanded an explanation. He asked quietly, "And you are?" He let the question hang, making his skepticism palpable. Ebony arched an eyebrow. She'd encountered microaggressions before, snide remarks, suspicious glances. But a direct challenge from the pilot himself was new. "Excuse me," she responded calmly, resisting the urge to snap back. Martin grew flustered, stumbling over his words. I just wanted to make sure you know you're in the correct seat. This is first class, and sometimes passengers get confused or, seat assignments." In that split second, Ebony felt a pang of anger, followed by the old, familiar hurt. But she reined it in with the poise of someone who'd navigated countless boardrooms, many of which had tried to undermine her. "He's not worth an outburst," she told herself. With measured composure, she tucked her laptop into her leather briefcase and reached into her bag for a folder. Inside that folder were her ownership documents, contracts, share agreements, and the official letter awarding her a 51% stake in Aero Meridian. A piece of it had recently been notarized, so she had a copy with her for her upcoming board meeting. "I think you'll find," Ebony said, handing him the first page, "that I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Do you?" Martin glanced at the document, his eyes scanning words like majority ownership and Ebony's name printed in bold. For a moment, he blinked as though he couldn't process what he was seeing. The lines of his face contorted in confusion. It seemed he was torn between disbelief, indignation, and a sense of creeping dread that he might have made a grave mistake. A hush fell over the nearby passengers, many of whom had either overheard or sensed the tension. One or two pulled out their phones either to document the unfolding drama or to feign distraction from the palpable discomfort in the air. Ebony locked her eyes on Martin's. "I'm Ebony Carter. I own 51% of Aero Meridian, Captain. So yes, I do belong here. Her tone remained measured, though her eyes betrayed a quiet fury. Martin felt his stomach sink, a flush of color rising to his face. The weight of his station as captain suddenly shifted to a precarious balancing act. He had unwittingly challenged the most influential person on board. "I see," he managed to say, handing her back the document with a trembling hand. He mumbled something resembling an apology, but Ebony was already turning back to her laptop, ending the conversation. The flight attendant who had welcomed Ebony earlier stood nearby, her eyes wide. In her mind, she was replaying how Ebony carried herself, how the pilot had questioned her. The blatant inequality of it all struck her in a new way. And as Ebony resumed typing, Martin realized that what he had set in motion would reverberate far beyond the cabin doors. While the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, Ebony took a quiet breath. She was used to proving herself, but each new incident chipped away at something deeper. Little did she know the real turbulence lay ahead, not just in the flight path, but in the corridors of power that governed her own airline. As the plane taxied down the runway, Ebony tried to push aside the unsettling confrontation with Captain Martin. She fastened her seatbelt and closed her eyes, willing her heart to steady. By the time the aircraft lifted into the Atlanta sky, Ebony had forced herself to focus on her upcoming board meeting. The next steps involved signing a strategic alliance with a logistics firm to expand cargo services. She couldn't afford to let petty prejudice distract her from the bigger picture until petty prejudice took center stage again. 45 minutes into the flight, Ebony was sipping a cup of coffee when the seatbelt sign flickered on. A gentle voice on the intercom announced some unexpected turbulence, advising everyone to remain seated. Moments later, the plane lurched, pitching the cabin into an uneasy sway. Ebony's coffee sloshed in its cup, nearly spilling onto her suit. Captain Martin's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a patch of rough air. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. We expect to clear it shortly." There was a forced calm in his voice that Ebony recognized from the many times she'd flown in the cockpit jump seat. Something was off. The turbulence felt too erratic. A ripple of worry spread among passengers. Ebony could hear anxious whispers from the rows behind her. She glanced out the window and saw thick, dark clouds stretching across the horizon. A storm system the flight plan should have accounted for. She gripped her armrests, feeling the plane vibrate under her. A second announcement followed, but this time Ebony caught a slight tremor in Martin's tone. "Flight attendants, secure the cabin." The flight attendants bustled through first class, checking overhead bins, ensuring trays were locked, and comforting visibly frightened travelers. Through the swirl of tension, Ebony's phone buzzed with a notification. Before takeoff, she'd set it to airplane mode, but she had Wi-Fi access for in-flight messaging. She glanced down to see a message from an Aero Meridian executive in Los Angeles, heard about the pilot incident. "Stay calm. We're handling it." Ebony's jaw clenched. News traveled fast. Perhaps a passenger had posted about the confrontation on social media. The turbulence worsened, causing the plane to dip suddenly. Gasps and a few shrieks echoed in the cabin. Ebony clutched the edges of her seat, her heartbeat hammering in her chest. She was no stranger to turbulent flights, but this felt personal. Every jolt, every drop in altitude seemed like an extension of the tension roiling inside her. In a calculated move, Ebony pulled up the airline's operational status on her laptop. As majority owner, she had special access to flight data and routes. She wanted to see if something had changed in the flight path. Her eyes flicked over the satellite data. Sure enough, the plane had veered off its initial flight plan to avoid a fast-moving storm cell, but the corrections seemed delayed. She knew enough about flight operations to realize that they might have missed an earlier window to circumvent the worst of the storm. As if to confirm her suspicions, the plane lurched again, throwing Ebony's coffee cup onto the floor. She grimaced. A flight attendant rushed over, bracing against the overhead compartment to keep her balance. "Ms. Carter, are you all right?" the flight attendant asked, a note of genuine concern in her voice. Ebony nodded, though she was far from all right. Her mind was racing with concerns about Captain Martin's judgment. Could his hostility toward her be clouding his decision-making? She didn't want to believe a pilot would jeopardize safety over personal prejudice. But a sliver of doubt wedged itself into her thoughts. Another jolt, and the oxygen masks trembled in their compartments. Fear prickled at the edges of Ebony's composure. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself that commercial pilots receive extensive training for scenarios exactly like this. But the question of whether Martin was following that training to the letter gnawed at her. Eventually, the turbulence began to ease. The plane leveled out, drifting into calmer skies. Ebony exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and a few flight attendants moved to clean up spills and reassure passengers. But Ebony's tension didn't fade. Something about the entire situation felt more tumultuous than a mere patch of rough air. She tapped a response to the executive in Los Angeles. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll address it once we land." In the back of her mind, she already suspected the pilot's microaggression was only the tip of the iceberg. Once her board of directors got wind of it, and the internet, by all indications, had already begun to blow up, there would be significant fallout. For Ebony, the turbulence in the air was just a prelude to the storm about to hit once the wheels touched down in Los Angeles. At 36,000 feet, the cabin was deceptively calm again. Passengers who had blanched during the turbulence were settling back into their seats, some half-dozing, others staring out the windows in weary relief. Flight attendants began their service, distributing snacks and drinks, trying to restore a semblance of normalcy. Yet Ebony sensed an undercurrent of tension. Every so often she noticed the flight attendants exchanging furtive glances. One of them, a tall man named Jorge, kept glancing at Ebony with a look that seemed part concern, part curiosity. She also noted hushed conversations in the galley near the cockpit door. Instead of trying to guess the content of those whispers, Ebony returned to her work. She clicked through proposals, reviewing cost analyses and route expansions. But a creeping sense of unease made it impossible to concentrate fully. It was as though the cabin air was charged with an invisible current of suspicion and speculation. About an hour into the flight, Ebony felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Jorge standing there, smiling politely. "Ms. Carter, do you have a moment?" he asked, his eyes flicking from her to the aisle, checking for onlookers. "Of course," she replied, powering down her laptop screen for privacy. He leaned in, voice lowered so no one else could hear. "I wanted to apologize for the incident earlier. I wasn't there when it happened, but the crew is talking. Captain Martin, well, he's known for being old-fashioned. I hope you're all right." Ebony appreciated the gesture, but an apology by proxy only underscored the pilot's refusal to address his own mistake. "I'm managing Jorge. Thank you for asking." He hesitated, shifting his weight. "I also wanted you to know that some passengers in business class overheard what happened. A few of them were quite upset. One of them claims to be a journalist. I saw him typing on his phone, could be a blog post or An article. Ebony's stomach clenched. The last thing the airline needed was negative press, especially about a racially charged incident involving its majority owner. "Did you catch a name?" she asked. "I think he said his name is Oliver Moore. Not sure who he writes for, but he's definitely taking notes." She nodded, filing the name away. "Thank you for letting me know, Jorge." He gave her a sympathetic look before retreating to the galley. As Ebony took a sip of water, she could almost hear the ticking clock of social media. If Oliver Moore was a journalist, it wouldn't be long before the story hit the digital news cycle. Airline pilot questions black woman's right to first class. Given Ebony's position in the industry, it could transform from a typical case of discrimination to a massive public relations disaster. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from an associate named Kendra, who handled communications for Aero Meridian. The text was short and urgent. "Call me when you land. We have a crisis brewing." Ebony closed her eyes and leaned her head against the seat. She had expected the day to bring negotiations and strategy sessions, not a full-blown PR meltdown caused by her own pilot. Still, she reminded herself that nothing worth having comes without resistance. Her journey to 51% ownership had been fraught with more significant challenges: financial shortfalls, unscrupulous partners and doubters who told her an African-American woman couldn't lead a major airline. She'd overcome them all. But the difference here was the personal sting. Captain Martin's dismissive question, "Do you belong here?" echoed in her mind like a wound that refused to clot. It wasn't just about her. It was about all the black women who fought for space in boardrooms, hospitals, classrooms, and yes, even airplane cabins. The responsibility weighed on her. She felt a sense of duty to address this openly, not just for her own sake, but for everyone who looked up to her leadership. At least for now, Ebony had a plan. She'd handle the board meeting, then confront the pilot issue head-on. She knew the PR protocols get ahead of the story issue, a statement ensure accountability. But deep down, she also wanted an honest conversation with Martin. She wanted him to understand that times have changed, that old prejudices have no place at 36,000 feet. But it remained to be seen whether he'd even be receptive, or if his pride would keep him grounded in outdated beliefs. For the rest of the flight, Ebony tried to maintain her composure, occasionally tapping into a calm playlist on her phone to center herself. She stole a glance at the cockpit door, wondering if Martin was stewing in regret or doubling down on resentment. She'd have her answers soon enough once they landed. The real storm of consequences would begin. The descent into Los Angeles was marked by a blazing sun reflecting off the Pacific Ocean, a spectacular view that typically thrilled Ebony. But today her anticipation was tinged with tension. The plane touched down at LAX with the familiar roar of engines, the landing gear squeaking upon contact with the runway. Passengers erupted into scattered applause, a common reaction after a turbulent flight. Ebony felt a knot in her stomach tighten as the aircraft taxied to the gate. Captain Martin's voice came over the intercom once more, thanking everyone for flying Aero Meridian. If he planned to acknowledge Ebony or address his earlier behavior, he made no mention of it. His announcement was bland professional and utterly devoid of any personal note. When the seatbelt sign blinked off, Ebony rose with her briefcase in hand. A few passengers in first class stood aside, letting her exit first. Some nodded at her in silent solidarity. A handful even offered apologetic smiles as if to say, "We're sorry you had to go through that." At the aircraft door, the flight attendants lined up to bid farewell. Captain Martin lingered behind them, looking down the jet bridge as if he wanted to escape the entire situation. Ebony stepped forward, considering whether to speak to him directly. Instead, she offered a polite nod to the crew, ignoring the pilot for the moment. She told herself the terminal would be a more appropriate setting for the confrontation. The moment she stepped into the bustling corridor of LAX, Ebony's phone buzzed incessantly. She checked the screen, multiple calls from Kendra, her communications lead, plus a flood of text messages. She quickly dialed Kendra's number, her free hand rolling her suitcase briskly toward the exit. Kendra's voice was shaky with urgency. "Ebony, we've got a problem. Social media is blowing up with tweets about the pilot incident. A passenger posted a video clip where Martin is basically asking if you belong in first class. It's already at 30,000 views on Twitter, and multiple outlets want to comment." Ebony sighed. She'd expected coverage, but not this quickly. "Understood. We'll address it, but first I have to deal with the board meeting. I can't ignore that." "Of course." But Ebony Kendra paused, her voice hesitant. "This could overshadow everything. This isn't just a regular passenger, it's our majority owner. Some are framing it as a major racial scandal." "I get it," Ebony replied, quickening her pace. "Set up a meeting with the entire PR team. I'll join via conference call right after the board meeting. In the meantime, just issue a statement that we're investigating the matter and reaffirm our commitment to diversity and respect." Kendra agreed, promising to email Ebony a draft statement. Ebony ended the call, exhaling deeply. This was the life of a CEO juggling million-dollar corporate deals on one side and crisis management on the other. She reached the VIP arrivals lounge, where a black SUV waited. Her driver, Marcus, greeted her with a respectful nod. "Long flight, ma'am?" he asked, noticing her tense expression. You could say that Ebony replied, sliding into the back seat. Once settled, she quickly checked her reflection in the tinted window, adjusting a stray curl. Her nerves were frayed, but she couldn't appear rattled. She had to walk into that boardroom with her head high, especially since some of her colleagues would likely already know about the viral video. She could practically see the headlines: Aero Meridian's CEO and majority owner faces racial bias from her own pilot. As the SUV navigated Los Angeles traffic, Ebony's mind ping-ponged between strategies. She thought about how to handle the board, how to address Captain Martin's actions, and how to manage the PR fallout. Deep inside, a flicker of anger burned. After years of sweat equity, after climbing her way to the pinnacle of corporate aviation, she was still forced to answer the question, "Do you belong here?" The SUV arrived at Aero Meridian's West Coast office, a sleek high-rise that overlooked the Hollywood Hills. Ebony squared her shoulders, reminding herself that she didn't just belong, she was the majority owner. She headed inside, determined to turn the narrative around. But little did she know a new twist awaited her on the top floor. Not everyone on the board was prepared to stand by her side in this explosive controversy. When Ebony stepped off the elevator into the executive suite, she felt a wave of déjà vu. The polished marble floors, the modern art on the walls, and the silent hum of intense power play. These were familiar markers of corporate life. But today, the usual air of professionalism felt overshadowed by tension. She could feel eyes following her as she made her way to the conference room. Inside the long, gleaming table was already half filled with board members. Some scrolled through their phones, likely reading the very tweets and posts Ebony had been warned about. Others were in hushed conversations, occasionally glancing in her direction. At the head of the table sat Simon Beale, the former CEO and now president of the board. A seasoned aviation veteran in his 60s, Simon had been instrumental in Ebony's climb, at least publicly. He held a cordial smile that never quite reached his eyes. Ebony sensed he was measuring her reaction to the scandal before she even opened her mouth. "Ebony," he greeted, gesturing for her to take the seat to his right. "Eventful flight, I hear." She forced a tight smile, claiming her chair. "That's one way to put it." Murmurs rippled around the table. One board member, a middle-aged man named Alan Knox, cleared his throat. "Should we address the pressing matter first, or proceed with the agenda?" Ebony's gaze darted around. She recognized the precarious position she was in. This was a meeting originally meant for finalizing a lucrative cargo partnership. However, the pilot incident had overshadowed everything. She decided to be proactive. "Let's discuss the incident briefly, then proceed with the agenda. We can't let this derail critical business, but we do need to show leadership on the issue." Simon leaned back in his chair. "Fair enough. We're all aware of the video circulating online. Some are calling it racially motivated. Ebony, care to comment on the pilot's behavior?" "From your perspective," Ebony took a steadying breath. "Captain Martin questioned my right to be in first class, implying I didn't belong. It was an overt microaggression, if not outright discrimination. Given my position, this is damaging not just personally but also to Aero Meridian's brand." A woman seated near the end, named Jacqueline Price, one of the few other female board members, nodded fervently. "We can't sweep this under the rug. It's unacceptable at any level. It tarnishes the airline's commitment to diversity." Alan Knox, however, seemed hesitant. "I agree it's unacceptable," he began, "but let's not rush to crucify the pilot. Mistakes happen. Perhaps he was having a bad day or misunderstood something." Ebony's eyes flashed. "A misunderstanding doesn't excuse blatant bias. This was a question of my belonging, an assumption that I, as a black woman, couldn't possibly be in first class legitimately. Whether or not he knew who I was doesn't change the nature of the bias." Simon raised a hand for calm. "I understand both perspectives. The question is how we respond. Legal is advising we conduct an internal investigation before taking any disciplinary action." An older board member, Dr. Clarissa Yuen, spoke up. "An investigation is fine, but we also need to be proactive in our communication. The social media backlash is real and growing by the minute." Ebony nodded. "I've already asked our communications team to draft a statement. We'll affirm our zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and acknowledge that we're reviewing the situation. I also plan to speak to Captain Martin directly." Simon frowned slightly. "Are you certain a direct confrontation is wise? Our attorneys might prefer we keep discussions behind closed doors to avoid any potential liability." "I'm aware of the legal concerns," Ebony replied, her voice measured. "But I have a responsibility, not just as CEO, but as a black woman who's faced these challenges before. Transparency is key. If I can have a productive conversation with Martin, it might mitigate further damage." A hush settled over the room. Everyone seemed to measure Ebony's resolve. Finally, Simon nodded in reluctant agreement. "Very well. Keep us informed." With that, Ebony steered the meeting back to the agenda, discussing the cargo partnership. Yet despite her best efforts, the pilot incident loomed like a dark cloud shadowing every topic. She could sense that some board members were worried this scandal could become the face of Aero Meridian overnight, undermining the progress she had fought so hard to achieve. By the time the meeting wrapped up, Ebony felt drained. She had secured tepid support for the cargo deal, enough to move forward, but not the resounding vote she'd hoped for. Instead, the room buzzed with uncertainty about how the airline would handle its own pilot's discriminatory act. As the board members dispersed, Simon asked Ebony to linger. The two stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, that offered a sweeping view of Los Angeles. "You handled that well," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Just remember, sometimes it's better to let legal navigate the choppy waters." Ebony met his gaze. "I appreciate the advice, Simon, but I'm not just navigating them. I'm the one piloting this plane." He gave her a thin smile, possibly torn between respect and caution. "Then we'll see where you land." Ebony left the conference room with a new sense of purpose. She might have limited support from certain board members, but she had her own voice and ownership stake to wield. Her next move was confront Captain Martin and hold him accountable. If there was going to be any healing or justice, it needed to start at the root of the problem. Back in her private suite at the Aero Meridian office, Ebony gazed out at the Los Angeles skyline through glass walls. The city's glittering lights were just beginning to show themselves as dusk approached. She took a moment to center herself. Her upcoming conversation with Captain Martin was going to be tricky. She dialed an internal line to the flight operations manager, a no-nonsense woman named Deborah Eastman. Deborah had been Ebony's ally before a staunch advocate for professional standards among the flight crew. If anyone could arrange a meeting with Martin swiftly, it was Deborah. "Deborah," here came the clipped voice on the other end. "Deborah, it's Ebony. I need to speak with Captain Martin Bradley, ASAP. Is he still at LAX?" A pause. "He is. He's scheduled for a turnaround flight to Seattle, but currently in the pilot's lounge. I can request he meet you in a private debrief room if you prefer." Ebony pictured Martin possibly reeling from embarrassment or doubling down on his prejudice. "Yes, please do, and ensure it's confidential." "Understood. I'll message you the room number once he's in place." Deborah hung up, leaving Ebony alone with her racing thoughts. Less than 30 minutes later, Ebony found herself walking through a restricted corridor of LAX badge clipped to her suit jacket. She paused outside a small conference room designated for staff debriefs. Taking a breath, she opened the door. Captain Martin stood at the far end, near a table strewn with flight manuals and safety checklists. He looked startled when she entered quickly, straightening his posture. His uniform was impeccable, the gold stripes on his shoulders gleaming under fluorescent lights. Yet Ebony noticed the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands. She closed the door behind her. "Captain Martin," she said evenly. He swallowed, finding his voice. "Ms. Carter." Ebony walked to the opposite side of the table, setting down her leather binder. She let the silence linger, meeting his gaze directly. Martin shifted from one foot to the other, as though the very air was pressing in on him. "I believe we have some things to discuss," Ebony began. "Your behavior on Flight 208, specifically questioning my right to be in first class, has ignited a major incident for this airline." "Do you have anything to say?" Martin exhaled shakily. I want to apologize. Truly. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. It was unprofessional." Ebony studied him for any hint of genuine remorse. Unprofessional is one way to put it. Discriminatory is another. Do you understand the implications of what you did? He looked down, a flush spreading across his cheeks. "I'm not a racist," he said quickly. "I've flown passengers of every background. It was just, when I saw you, I assumed. I made an assumption, and it was wrong." Ebony kept her tone measured. "Yes, it was. And that assumption that a black woman can't belong in first class isn't just a small mistake. It reflects a bias that contributes to systemic discrimination. Do you see why this is such a serious issue?" He nodded, though his eyes still refused to meet hers. "I do. I realize how it looks, but I swear I was just trying to confirm the seat assignment. Maybe it was a long day, or maybe Captain Martin. This isn't about you being tired, Ebony interjected, crossing her arms. This is about acknowledging that your actions were rooted in prejudice. Whether conscious or not, it has consequences for you, for me, and for our airline. People are outraged, and rightfully so. Silence stretched for a moment. Martin finally managed to look at her, his voice earnest. I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I'll accept whatever disciplinary action the airline decides. Ebony studied him. She didn't sense the malice she initially feared. Perhaps it was more ignorance, complacency, and unexamined bias. Still, an apology wouldn't fix the public relations disaster or the personal hurt he inflicted. We are conducting a formal internal investigation, she said. Until then, you'll be on administrative leave. HR will guide you through the process. Beyond that, Captain, I suggest you educate yourself about racial bias and microaggressions. The world is changing, and so must we. He blinked, swallowing hard. I understand, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Ebony gathered her binder, her heart pounding with an unspoken mix of anger, sadness, and cautious relief. She wanted to say something else, something about the pain of having one's very presence questioned, but she decided he likely wouldn't grasp its full weight in that moment. I trust you'll cooperate fully, she said, turning toward the door. As she stepped out, Ebony felt the burden of representation pressing heavier than ever. She had faced the pilot who questioned her belonging, but many more would question the belonging of countless others who shared her skin tone. She couldn't fight them all individually, but she could make an example of this incident, a beacon of accountability for her airline and perhaps for the broader industry. She left Captain Martin alone in that room, a man who had soared the skies for decades, but was only now discovering the weight of his unseen biases. For Ebony, this was just the beginning. The hardest part was yet to come. Facing the court of public opinion, the media and her own board, all of whom demanded more than just an apology. They demanded transformation. The next morning, Ebony awoke to a flurry of notifications. News outlets had picked up the story, each spinning its own angle. Aero Meridian pilot. Challenges. CEO in racial bias. Incident black. Female airline owner speaks out. Do you belong? Here, trending after viral video. Social media was ablaze with hashtags as countless people shared similar experiences of prejudice during air travel. Kendra Ebony's communications lead had arranged a press conference at a mid-sized venue near the LAX terminal. It was large enough to accommodate local and national media, yet discreet enough to avoid creating a circus. Ebony spent part of the morning rehearsing her statement in front of a mirror, ensuring her words struck the right balance of accountability, transparency, and forward-looking commitment. When she arrived at the press conference room, camera crews were already setting up under bright, unrelenting lights. Reporters milled about comparing notes and angles. Ebony spotted Oliver Moore, the journalist passenger from the flight who had reportedly posted the initial video. He stood near the front, a small notebook in hand, his expression thoughtful but guarded. At precisely 10 o'clock, Ebony took her place behind a lectern emblazoned with the Aero Meridian logo. Kendra stood off to the side, arms folded, ready to step in if needed. The room settled into silence. Ebony cleared her throat, microphone amplifying the sound. Good morning. I'm Ebony Carter, the majority owner and CEO of Aero Meridian. Thank you for coming. I want to address an incident that occurred on a recent flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles, involving myself and one of our pilots. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. During that flight, Captain Martin Bradley questioned my presence in first class, implying I did not belong there. I want to acknowledge the pain and frustration this has caused, not just for me personally, but for many who have experienced similar discrimination. It was unacceptable and is currently under internal investigation. A cacophony of camera shutters erupted, capturing every syllable she uttered. Ebony continued, Aero Meridian is committed to fostering a culture where every passenger employee and partner feels respected and valued. As CEO, I take full responsibility for ensuring our staff is held to the highest standards of professionalism and inclusivity. A reporter raised his hand. Ms. Carter, can you tell us what immediate actions are being taken against the pilot in question? Captain Martin Bradley has been placed on administrative leave pending a thorough investigation. We believe in due process, but we also recognize the seriousness of his actions. If our investigation confirms a violation of our code of conduct, which we believe it will appropriate disciplinary measures, will follow. Another reporter, a woman with a local LA news station, leaned forward. Some on social media are calling for Captain Bradley to be fired outright. Can you speak to that? Ebony nodded, anticipating the question. I understand the sentiment. However, Aero Meridian has protocols in place for investigating all incidents. This ensures fairness and thoroughness. I assure you we will not hesitate to take strong action if warranted. Oliver Moore spoke up next, introducing himself. Oliver Moore, freelance journalist and passenger on the flight. Many people are applauding you for standing up against discrimination. But some critics say you're using this as a PR opportunity, addressing the issue publicly, only because it affects you personally and threatens the airline's reputation. How do you respond? Ebony felt a prick of irritation. She managed a calm tone. Mr. Moore, I've been dedicated to building an inclusive company from day one. This commitment didn't start with this incident. However, this situation has shone a harsh light on how far we still have to go. Addressing it publicly is not a PR stunt. It's a necessary step to promote transparency and accountability. Oliver nodded, jotting notes. Ebony braced for more questions, but the next query came from a major cable news correspondent. Ms. Carter, do you plan any changes in hiring, diversity training, or corporate policy to prevent incidents like this? Yes, Ebony said firmly. We're already reviewing our training programs for all staff, including pilots. We'll implement more robust bias training, and we will collaborate with third-party experts to assess our culture. Our goal is to set a new standard in the airline industry for inclusivity. Kendra stepped forward, signaling that the time was nearly up. Ebony offered a concluding statement. Aero Meridian stands at a crossroads. We can let this incident define us negatively, or we can use it as a turning point toward deeper inclusion and empathy. As CEO, I'm committed to the latter. Thank you. With that, the press conference ended. Ebony turned away from the cameras, the weight of 1,000 eyes still pressing on her shoulders. She caught Oliver Moore's gaze as she stepped down. His expression was neither hostile nor friendly, just piercing. In that moment, Ebony realized that no matter how eloquent her words, actions would speak louder. The next few weeks would be crucial, and the world would be watching to see if her airline truly took flight in the direction of equality. If it remained grounded in the old ways of prejudice and bias. In the weeks that followed, Ebony found herself navigating a maze of challenges. True to her word, she initiated a series of company-wide reforms, mandatory bias training, open forums for employees to share experiences, and an anonymous hotline for reporting discrimination. The HR department quickly became swamped with calls and emails from staff members revealing incidents of subtle prejudice that had gone unchecked for years. It was a painful revelation, but also a necessary one. Despite Ebony's proactive measures, the media frenzy continued. Aero Meridian stock dipped slightly as investors worried about potential lawsuits, bad press, and the shaky morale of the flight crew. Some board members who had been lukewarm during the initial discussion now expressed open concern about Ebony's aggressive approach, questioning whether making a public spectacle of the pilot's suspension might hurt the airline in the long run. Meanwhile, Ebony commissioned a thorough external audit of the airline's diversity and inclusion practices. Led by a consultancy known for its hard-hitting reports, the audit involved interviewing employees from every rank and analyzing hiring trends. Preliminary findings revealed that while Aero Meridian had made strides particularly under Ebony's leadership, there were still pockets of entrenched bias among certain management levels. One evening, as Ebony was preparing for yet another cross-country flight, she received a surprising call from Captain Martin Bradley. He had remained on administrative leave, cooperating with the investigation, but otherwise silent. Ebony hesitated before picking up, unsure of what he might say. Ms. Carter Martin's voice sounded subdued. "I just wanted to let you know I appreciate the fairness of this investigation. The company lawyers explained the process, and I understand the potential outcomes." Ebony stayed silent, letting him continue. "I've been reading," he went on, voice trembling slightly, "about microaggressions, unconscious bias, and the experiences of Black Americans. I realize I've been ignorant about a lot of things." Ebony closed her eyes, recalling the tension of that moment in first class, and the humiliating sense of being questioned in a space that was rightfully hers. "Thank you for telling me," she finally replied. "I hope you continue learning." He sighed. "I'm trying. And I wanted to say if the investigation leads to my termination, I understand. I'm prepared for that." Ebony's throat tightened. She'd fought for accountability, but she also recognized the power of genuine remorse and transformation. "Let's see what the investigation concludes. I believe in accountability, but I also believe people can change." The call ended on a note of uncertainty, both for Captain Martin's future and the airline's. Ebony found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. Anger at the hurt he'd caused, compassion for his willingness to learn, and a relentless commitment to forging a path forward. A few days later, the results of the external audit came in accompanied by a board meeting to discuss the findings. Ebony had just finished reviewing the 80-page report when she received a text from Simon Beale Emergency Board session tonight. Must attend in person. Heart pounding, she made her way to Aero Meridian's executive conference room. The board members were already seated, their faces stony. Simon, uncharacteristically grave, wasted no time. The audit reveals systemic issues, and the media spotlight on this pilot case has magnified them. Investors are questioning leadership. Some of us believe it might be in the company's best interest if you step down, or at least temporarily relinquish your CEO duties. Ebony felt the ground shift beneath her. She owned 51% of the airline. She was the majority shareholder. Legally, she had the final say. Yet if the board collectively turned against her, her position could become untenable. She stared at Simon, disbelief warring with fury. "You can't be serious. I've done everything to address the problem." The pilot's incident sparked real change. "Now you want me to step away?" Alan Knox chimed in, sounding almost apologetic. Ms. Carter, we're not saying you've failed. But the stock is unstable, and public perception is that the airline is embroiled in controversy. Sometimes a symbolic gesture is needed to show we're turning a corner. Jacqueline Price spoke up in Ebony's defense. This is absurd. Ebony has been at the forefront of pushing diversity and inclusivity. Asking her to step down sends a terrible message. A heated debate ensued with voices rising around the table. Ebony felt her heartbeat racing, anger roiling in her chest. The men and a few women who had once celebrated her vision were now clamoring for her removal, all in the name of damage control. Finally, Ebony stood, her voice trembling with controlled anger. I'm the majority shareholder. Any decision regarding my position has to go through me. Let me make one thing clear. I'm not stepping down or stepping aside. The changes we're making will take time, but they are necessary. If our investors can't see that we'll find new investors. The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air. Simon pursed his lips, exhaling heavily. Very well, he said, not bothering to hide his frustration. But the pressure is mounting. If this scandal deepens, we could be forced to reconsider other measures, including a vote of no confidence. Majority stake or not, the brand could be irreparably damaged. Ebony held her ground. Then we'll find a way to save the brand while standing by our principles. She exited the boardroom with her head held high, though her hands trembled with fury and fear. The pilot's question, "Do you belong here?" seemed to echo in the very halls she'd fought to occupy. Now her own board was essentially asking the same question. But Ebony refused to be pushed out of what she had built. One way or another, she would show them all that she belonged exactly where she was, at the helm of Aero Meridian, guiding it toward the future she had always envisioned. 2 weeks later, an internal memo circulated. The investigation had concluded that Captain Martin Bradley's conduct was indeed discriminatory and against the airline's code of ethics. The recommended course of action was termination. Ebony read the memo in silence, her emotions churning. She knew it was the right decision. Actions had consequences, and this was a critical moment to uphold the airline's values. Yet she also recalled his phone call, his admission of guilt and willingness to learn. At the same time, pressure from the board hadn't subsided. Investors were wary, and some influential board members continued to hint that Ebony's departure would help stabilize the airline's public image. Social media activists, however, rallied around Ebony, swording her stance on accountability. A grassroots hashtag, "We Belong," here surged in support of Ebony and countless others who'd faced discrimination in professional spaces. In the end, Ebony signed off on Martin's termination. Hours after the announcement was made, she received an email from him. His tone was regretful, but also oddly thankful. "Thank you for opening my eyes," he wrote. "I'm sorry it took losing my job to truly see the harm I caused. I hope Aero Meridian becomes a beacon of what an airline can be." Ebony closed the email, feeling a pang of sadness but also resolution. Sometimes karma was swift, and sometimes it was just. The next day, Ebony convened a special meeting with the board. She arrived armed with the external audit's recommendations and a strategic plan for addressing them. Flanked by supportive executives, she proposed a comprehensive multi-year initiative named Project Skyrise. The plan included mandatory annual bias and inclusivity training for all employees, increased diversity in leadership positions, aiming for 30% representation of marginalized groups at the managerial level or higher within 3 years, employee resource groups to foster dialogue and mentoring, community outreach and scholarship programs to encourage more people of color to enter aviation careers. Some board members balked at the projected costs and timeline. Others, like Jacqueline Price, were enthusiastic. Ultimately, Ebony reminded them of her 51% stake and spelled out the long-term benefits. A more inclusive airline would attract diverse customers, reduce legal risks, and enhance the brand's global appeal. After intense debate, the board voted in favor of Project Skyrise. Ebony took a moment to breathe, savoring this victory. Yes, the journey was far from over. Yes, some of these board members would likely continue to question her leadership, but she had enough allies and enough power to press forward. Meanwhile, public response to Captain Martin's termination was divided. Some argued it was too harsh, while others applauded Aero Meridian for taking a stand. Ebony released a statement explaining the decision, emphasizing that the airline would provide resources and training to all employees to prevent future incidents. The statement also reaffirmed Ebony's personal commitment to building an airline where every passenger and employee felt they belonged. The real turning point came when a series of headlines emerged describing Ebony's new initiatives. Aero Meridian's bold plan for airline inclusivity read 1. Another declared Ebony Carter leads the charge, proving she and everyone else belongs here. Share prices began to recover, and new partnerships emerged from entities that valued Aero Meridian's progressive stance. Walking through the terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson a month later, Ebony paused at a bustling gate where a large poster displayed Aero Meridian's new tagline, "Welcome to the future of flight, where everyone belongs." She smiled, thinking back to the day she confronted Captain Martin. His words had stung, but they'd also lit a fire beneath her. That single question, "Do you belong here?" had triggered a wave of change that was still rippling through the industry. As she boarded her flight once again in first class, Ebony noticed a wide-eyed little black girl clutching a plane-shaped backpack. The girl stared at Ebony, then at her seat as if amazed to see someone who looked like her in a place of prominence. Ebony offered a warm smile. That was the moment Ebony realized the true meaning of belonging. It wasn't just about owning 51% of an airline or sitting at the head of a boardroom table. It was about transforming the entire industry so that anyone from any background could walk into the cabin of an airplane with their head held high. Because yes, they did belong there, just as Ebony always had and always would. Thank you for journeying with us through this compelling story of resilience, reckoning, and renewal. Ebony Carter's battle to prove she belonged in a seat she rightfully owned is more than just one person's fight. It's a testament to the power of standing firm against bias, and a reminder that progress often emerges from moments of uncomfortable truth. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so more people can join these heartfelt conversations on empowerment and equality. Every share helps spread awareness. Every subscription fuels more stories that champion inclusivity, and every like tells us you believe in a future where no one questions whether you belong. Together we can elevate voices, inspire change, and hold on to hope that the skies we navigate, both literally and metaphorically, are big enough for all of us. Thank you for watching and supporting.